One of the greatest mentors I've ever had is a guy called Danny Boylan, a tough Dubliner who at age 13 was taken from his family and put into an industrial home where for the next few years he suffered horrendously. He came out with so much hatred in his heart for anyone in a uniform that he'd start a fight with a bus conductor. He was regularly in and out of prison. He drank and was an alcoholic throughout those years. And when I met him, he had decided to give up drink because he knew that was the root of all his problems. Because when he drank, he got angry. When he got angry, he remembered what was done to him. And when he remembered what was done to him, he'd fight anyone. He fought in the streets, he fought everywhere. And when I got to know him, he was going through a phase in his life where he was trying to come to terms with his life and what had occurred. He had segregated himself away from everyone that he would have known because he knew they'd lead him down the path he didn't want to go. And I'd call into his house and we'd sit and drink tea and he'd talk. Danny Boylan, what a man. Danny Boylan was the bravest individual I've ever met because he was completely independent of the good opinion of others. He was lovely to people, but he didn't care how people perceived him. He'd spent enough years in his own head thinking that he was worthless. But he got to this place where he'd sit up late into the night, he told me, and he'd stare into the fire and he just rewrote the whole story of his life, where he reclaimed his sense of worthfulness, and he was a pleasure to be with. Whenever you'd meet Danny and you'd sit and drink tea in his house, you'd leave feeling braver. He had this saying, fuck them. And I'd say, who's them, Danny? He goes, the doubts, the fears, the concerns, the worries, that I'm not good enough, and all those that say you can't do it. And I always remembered that. You know, when we go to schools that maybe would be seen as in areas where there'd be higher levels of crime perhaps, and a lot of the kids that would be in these schools a few years later might be in prisons, I'd bring Danny. There's no point in me talking to those kids. Danny could talk to those kids. He could figure out who they were and speak to them, and he'd have them captivated. But Danny died last year, and I really miss him, because you'd call into Danny's house in Weaver Square in Dublin. He was so proud of his house. And you'd have a cup of tea, and he'd tell you story after story about this prison or that fight or this person. But then you go out and you go for a walk with him, and he knew everyone in that area. I remember this one girl, she was in a motorized wheelchair. She had very little function in her body, and she'd visibly start laughing and get excited when she saw Danny. And her mother would say she loves Danny most of all, because I think Danny judged no one. He just didn't judge people. He knew life can be hard. But what I've really taken into my own life from Danny is that there is a fearless street fighter in all of us. You may never need to throw a punch, but knowing that there's a grit inside you, there's an unbreakable part. Because Danny used to say, they just didn't break me. They could never break me. But that's in all of us. And very often we sell ourselves short because we don't realize that that street fighter is inside of us, that's tough and hardy and can endure and go through hard times and come out the other side. Yeah, Danny Boylan. They'll never make another one like Danny.
What would you say to Danny Boylan, 13 and a half now, based on the life you've lived? What would you say to him?
You've done a good fucking job. Because by right, the paths and the roads that I was on were guaranteed to do damage, mentally do damage to a human being. I have the scars and have the memories of it. But I have learned how to erase all that and look forward to better times than what was then. That was a platform to learn from. That was your status. That was the ingredients to build you up, to get the strength into it.